Our second speaker tonight is not here. He's in China, and he had to go away at last minute, so he's pre-recorded his speech. It's John Miles. He's the chairman of Halo IPT. He's also main board director at ARUP, and we're very grateful that Dick Simpson has come to join the panel in his absence, because I think it's about 3 or 4 in the morning for John now, so he couldn't do a video link. John's going to talk to you about the change we can expect in how electric cars are recharged. And he's going to culminate in his conversation in talking about dynamic recharging. And I don't know how many people here are familiar with that, but the potential for that technology to dramatically change the car industry is very present. And as you're watching this, think about what it means for Nissan, who are leading the charge on electric vehicles. So hopefully now, if the technology all works, we will move to a short video clip.
Well, our thoughts tonight are on questions of change, sudden business change, and both Jim and Simon have spoken to this issue and pointed up some quite interesting thoughts. What I'd like to do now is take you on a short journey around one particular example which has the potential to bring great change to our business and our social environment. The example is from the automotive industry. It has to do with charging electric cars, and because of that it spans the gap between the electric car on the one hand and the power grid on the other hand. So this is an interesting business proposition which spans between two quite different business worlds, power generation on the one hand and transport on the other. I'd like to think about 3 different words which illustrate a progression of business change. First, convenience, something that starts as simply a convenient item, which then grows into business opportunity, which creates an atmosphere where things begin to happen, and then maybe precipitates, if you're lucky, an avalanche of change where things change beyond all recognition all of a sudden. And a good example of that perhaps is just the internet itself, the way in which it first started as a convenience for the people that invented it and went on to do those other things that I spoke about, so that today it's difficult to imagine how we would live without it. So let's just look at the example that we have here. This has to do with wireless charging for electric vehicles. If you think about electric vehicles coming onto our streets, it's a presumption at the moment that we will be able to charge them when we want to, and that to charge them we will simply plug them in, one end into the car, the other end into some form of convenient charger, either on the street or in our garage or maybe in a car park at the supermarket, and then we will be able to charge the vehicle up. But if you think a little bit more about that, if there are lots of vehicles around on our streets in future, how very inconvenient it will be to have to get out and plug it in every time you want to charge it. Wouldn't it be better if we had something that was wireless, so that you didn't have to get out of the car and make a physical connection at all, but you could just drive up to a charging point, stop, get out of your car, walk away, and it would charge itself without any mechanical connection at all? That's the concept behind wireless charging, and that's what the company Halo IPT has set itself the task to do, to produce wireless charging systems for electric vehicles. Now, you might wonder, why is that going to be some agent of great change? What is it that's going to bring about an avalanche from this? And so I'd just like to go through those 3 words with you now. Convenience first, then opportunity, and then avalanche. First of all, the convenience factor. Well, I've spoken about this already. How much easier if you didn't have to plug it in? How much more would you pay if you could get away with not using the cable in your car and you just did what I described? Well, the answer is we think quite a lot of people would pay for that. People pay for automatic gearboxes in their car, or for rain-sensitive windscreens where the wipers come on without you having to flick a switch. So it's a proven point that people will pay for convenience. But if we think a little bit more about what that might mean, we start to think about some real business opportunities that follow from that convenience. So if we now have a vehicle which is fitted with wireless charging, and you don't have to plug it in when you want it to be able to communicate with the grid and take charge, then what happens now, if we think forward to the days of smart grid, is that when we pull up and park our car in an appropriate spot with one of these chargers in, as we get out of the car, not only can we take charge from the grid, but maybe the grid can take charge from us. And if we don't have to plug in, then that vehicle is immediately available as a source of storage of energy to the grid operator. So all of a sudden, by putting this convenient item on the bottom of the car, we're now enabling a business opportunity for the grid operator, because now the grid operator has access to a whole series of storage devices, being the electric cars, in a way that he never could have before, in a way that in fact would be quite difficult for him before, because he could only access those vehicles if the person who was driving the vehicle remembered to plug it in. So this suddenly starts to open up all sorts of business opportunities for the smart grid operator. But of course you need to be able to control that. You only need to be able to take the charge from the car when the car has enough charge in it and when the owner of the car wants to let you do it. And so of course our handheld phone begins to come into the picture now, and the computer on board the car. So we want to program the computer perhaps so that the vehicle will never discharge if the battery is perhaps a little bit on the low side, and maybe will always discharge if the price of electricity at the time that the grid operator calls for it is above a certain level. So with a little bit of intelligence on the car, we can imagine this all being automated, and the car will send us a signal when it's being discharged, and we can send it a signal from our handheld if we want to change our minds, go somewhere in a minute and stop it from discharging because we don't want the battery to get too low. So a whole series of grid operation opportunities begin to open up because of what was at the first sight just a convenience feature. And in the same way we can see other opportunities opening up, because if we can have an attractive form of charging, and if a supermarket for example puts some of these wireless charging points into its car park, then people will go there by preference, and maybe the supermarket can attract them there by preference. Maybe the supermarket can begin to say you get free electricity if you spend more than £100 in our supermarket. So we can see all sorts of business opportunities that begin to grow and grow out of the fact that people just like to park in these convenience parking spaces. But what about the avalanche that I spoke of? Well, the avalanche, in my view, comes about a little later on in our story, because, of course, one of the big objections to electric cars is that they don't have enough range. No matter whether you may be able to do a bit of convenience charging here and there throughout the day, even if the battery is fully charged, you're unlikely to be able to go more than 100 miles or so. And so you'll never be able to drive from London to Newcastle unless batteries become much, much more efficient, bigger, and so on and so on. Well, one way around that problem, perhaps, is not only to have these charging points that I've been talking about put into convenient car parking spaces so that they can charge the car when it's stationary, but what if we put them along the road so that the car could pick up charge as it travelled? Now we have an opportunity perhaps to extend the range of the electric vehicle almost to infinity, because if we can charge the car as it travels, such that the battery can be topped up every time it gets a little on the low side, then actually, provided we've got enough of these things put in the road, then we could extend the range of the car so that you can not only drive from London to Newcastle, but London to Edinburgh or London to John O'Groats. That is a real game changer. That could be an avalanche of change, because now, instead of the electric vehicle manufacturers having to seek bigger and bigger batteries to extend the range further and further to compete with the standard that's been set by fossil fuel, being petrol, now actually you can go in the reverse direction. We can make the batteries smaller and smaller because they can pick up their charge at any time, at any place. The batteries become cheaper and cheaper, and as a consequence they're probably more reliable because they're being less demanded of during the journey, and the range will extend, and you can suddenly see a whole new paradigm of travel which is based on grid electricity rather than fossil fuel. So we see this as a very disruptive technology, potentially changing the face of the concept of transport around the UK and, of course, around anywhere else in the world, moving us on by a great leap towards low-carbon transport. Thank you.
Well, I think that's very interesting, that idea of dynamic recharging. And if you Nissan in 2009 said that they were going to devote all of their near-term R&D to electric, and most of the other big car companies were thinking they could meet the emissions requirements through refining their combustion engines. But Nissan was thinking differently. They were thinking about the customer wanting more resource-efficient vehicles, and electric are a much more efficient solution. So they devoted their R&D to it. They came out with the Nissan Leaf in January. That does 100 miles on £2 of electricity. Now, you've still got plenty of people saying, yeah, but it'll never catch on because there isn't the recharging infrastructure and the batteries cost £10,000. Well, dynamic recharging ends both of those arguments when it comes in, if it does, but it looks quite likely that it will. It creates a vehicle that's much cheaper to run than a combustion engine, and it never has to go to a petrol station. So you end up with quite simply just a much better product. And I think it's companies like Nissan who are able to see the changing paradigm, invest ahead of it, who will do very well.